Good afternoon and welcome to Metro on 88.5 FM in Boulder and 1390 AM in Denver with your host, Miriam Schiff. In our world today, there are many who have experienced past life episodes. Past life protocols, experiences, and language have become a part of everyday occurrences and interviews. Perhaps there was a time in all our lives when we had a sense of something more than another memory, moments that bring one to another time and into physical and emotional experiences of another time. My guest today is Kelvin Chin, public speaker, author, life after life expert, executive director, and founder of turningwithin.org and Overcoming the Fear of Death Foundation. He has been a previous guest on our shows and always a fantastic person to speak to about these things. Today we're going to be talking about his own life after life experiences, which he chronicles in his newest book, After the Afterlife, Memories of My Past Lives. His previous books are Overcoming the Fear of Death, through each of the main four belief systems, which is a non-religious approach, and Marcus Aurelius Updated, 21st Century Meditations on Living Life. For more information, you can contact Kelvin, Kelvin, Chin, CHIN.org, and you can also go to turningwithin.org. Welcome, Kelvin. Thank you so much for once again joining me today.
Yeah, great to be here with you again, Miriam.
Tell us, you and I have spoke before about past lives. I hate saying past lives because from reading the book and from some of my own experiences, past lives come into this life. They're no different. You carry the traits from past lives into this life as well, besides your ancestral DNA traits. So talk to us about the catalyst for writing The Afterlife, Memories of My Past Lives.
Well, segueing from what you just said, is pretty much that, having so many past life memories, I've had a couple of dozen memories, a couple dozen lifetimes worth that touched a couple dozen lifetimes over about 6,000 years. And having all these memories, hundreds, I don't know, I haven't counted, but many, many memories over this period of time, over the last 45 years, this lifetime, that they've surfaced, has shown me exactly what you just said, how my traits my personality traits have continued over these millennia. And in seeing how these memories have helped me today, over the last 45 years, that's really what catapulted me into thinking, well, maybe I should write a book, maybe I should write this stuff down, and maybe it'll help other people. It's also part of my Overcoming the Fear of Death work, as you've outlined as well, helping people reduce their fears so that they can live more effectively in the present. So for both those reasons.
What was your first experience? Was it a memory? Was it total immersion? Was it that you saw an artifact? What was it?
The very first memory that I had, and I didn't even know it was a past life memory, the first experience I had was a bad dream, a really, really, really bad nightmare, where I was so upset emotionally that it obviously left a deep impression. And about 6 months later, I was on a long meditation retreat with a whole bunch of people, and I was there with my close best friend, George Hammond, and we were talking after lunch, walking out in the field somewhere out in Switzerland in the Alps behind our hotel. And I started to tell him the dream, and he finished it. I got like one sentence into the dream, told him I had a bad dream, and he said, "This is what you were wearing, this is where you were." And I said, "What?" And he said, "Yeah." I said, "How do you know this?" He said, "Well, I found you 2,000 years ago. I'm the one who found you in the ditch." All upset. And that's when that happened. And that led to a realization of what the experience I was having during the meditation retreat in that hotel in Switzerland, where I was being crucified upside down. And then he helped me connect those dots. That was the very, very first thing that happened.
Does one have to be in a meditative state, or were you in a meditative state when this happened?
I was in a quasi-meditative state. What does that mean? Well, I was sort of meditating, but we were doing these energy moving exercise type things. I'm sure many of your listeners have heard of this or done this themselves, just kind of shifting energy around in your body. And so that's why I say quasi-meditative. So I was in a relaxed state. I was moving energy around in my body, and something got unblocked, and then boom, I flipped over on my back spontaneously. It was completely involuntary, and I felt myself dying, being crucified upside down, and all the physical pain, the emotional anguish, the emotional pain. It was like a whole body, you know that phrase sometimes people use, a whole body experience, and it was a whole emotion experience for me. And it happened every time I closed my eyes for 2 months.
What was the finality of it? You said it happened every time you closed your eyes for 2 months. Did it stop after that? Was it more about other experiences? What was it?
Yeah, so what happened with that is it happened at least for 2 months, and maybe it lasted longer than that. This was 1977, so, memories are not absolutely exact, but it happened in 1977, I know, because I know when I was on that 2-month course. And it continued for some weeks and maybe months afterwards a little bit, but it subsided, and it became less intense as I became less resistant to what was going on and just allowing it to happen, and then learning more about myself from it. And other things started opening up, and that's shortly after that my slave experience opened up. I started remembering, again, it was another almost death experience. All my past life memories have not been about death and dying, but the first two were, interestingly enough. And I almost died on a piece of wreckage in the Mediterranean. Again, this didn't all come to me at once. As you saw when you read the book, it's like a jigsaw puzzle, little puzzle pieces here and there. But after a while, after several months of stuff coming to me in bits and pieces, I figured out I was probably a Carthaginian slave on a Carthage, a warship of, Carthage, the Carthage Empire, fighting the Romans on the Mediterranean Sea, and I almost died in an explosion of my ship as a slave.
There were different ways which served as springboards for you. In the book, you talk about artifacts, and then you talk about a knowing. Tell us, define those two for me, and what did they look like for you?
Yeah, well, the artifacts ones, I kind of refer to some of these precursors of past life memories, the stuff that can happen before you actually may have a full-blown past life memory. I call them recognition memories. So in retrospect, looking back when I was 5, 6, 7 years old, I would go to the Museum of Fine Arts in Boston, Massachusetts, near where we used to live, and where I grew up. And my mom and I would go there first thing Saturday morning regularly, maybe sometimes a couple times a month, but at least once every month or two, we would go there, and she would leave me. I'm 5, 6, 7 years old. She would leave me in the lobby, and she would go off, and she'd say, "Look at Mickey. Look at your Mickey Mouse watch, Kel, and meet me back here." And she'd teach me what 11 o'clock looked like, the big, little hand on the 11, the big hand on the 12. And I'd meet her back there, and I'd walk around to two areas, the Egyptian mummies and the medieval armor. I didn't know why at the time, but in retrospect, looking back, I realized later I had memories of being Egyptian priests several times in ancient Egypt. I remember being in the Crusades now, but back when I was 5, 6, 7 years old, I just went to those areas because I felt comfortable there. I didn't know why. I think they were artifact-related, as you say, recognition memories. And in terms of the knowingness experience, I had an experience in early 1978. Again, it was not in meditation. It was after my meditation when I was lying down resting afterwards. I always lie down and rest, and if any of your listeners meditate, I always suggest that you rest for 5, 10, 15 minutes after you finish your meditation, regardless of what kind of meditation technique you do. Always rest afterwards. So I'm lying down resting, and like a camera went on in my head, and I saw myself walking into this big stone room and walls and ceiling, everything huge stone. And I walked up to a full-length mirror. There was nobody else in the room, and there was a full-length mirror in the middle of the room. I walked up to it, and I saw myself, and I knew it was me. That's that knowingness thing you're asking about. I don't know how I knew. I just knew that was me. How do I know? I tell people, like, how do I know that, that I'm talking to you on a call right now? I don't know. I just know. I don't need to go ask somebody. It was that level of knowingness. I just knew it was me looking at myself in that mirror at that time, in the experience.
Okay, you're talking about your experiences, and I know there are going to be people say, okay, I need hands-on validation about this. For me, it's not black and white. It wasn't a cognition thing. It was nothing that I, as a person, could put my hands on. Give me how you found your validation. I believe it was 1976?
77 is when it first started, but people got to understand, I'm a skeptic. I grew up as a science-based person. Both of my parents were scientists. I did not believe in heaven. I didn't believe in an afterlife or nothing. I went to church, but I didn't really believe what they were telling us, okay, when I was growing up. So when I didn't believe in reincarnation when I first started having these experiences. I thought I was fantasizing and imagining stuff, making it up. So I always look at things like, how can I corroborate this through some sort of external sources? So the first thing I look at is, okay, is there stuff about this that I'm remembering that I didn't study, that Kelvin Chin never studied or knew about? And one of the things that happened many years later, after that 1978 experience I told you, I walked and I saw myself in the mirror, and I saw myself as a crusader in the mirror. I didn't know who I was, but I saw it was huge, and I had red hair and, a white tunic with the Red Cross, and I was wearing chainmail and all this. But about 20 years later, maybe even later than that. No, it was about, it was whatever the math is, 2010 minus 1978, whatever that math is. In 2010, I was in a hotel room with my daughter meditating. She was in high school at the time. And we were sitting there meditating together, and I yelled out Saracen swine multiple times, and I could see myself sitting there in my meditation with my eyes closed. Actually, she told me afterwards that it was after our meditation. We were lying down resting. I was lying down on the floor, and she was lying on the bed resting, and she heard me yell out, so she looked at me, and she saw me holding with two hands, holding as if I'm holding a sword, and I'm cutting it through the air. And I was yelling it. I didn't even remember I'd had this experience, so she told me afterwards. She reminded me of this recently when I was writing the book. She said, Daddy, you remember? Dad, you remember? And you were yelling the Saracen swine. And then we had to look it up afterwards because we didn't know what Saracens meant. And it turns out the word Saracen is the word for Muslims before 1600. The word we call Muslims now is this term that's relatively recent in the last, whatever the math is, 400 years. Before that, they were called Saracens. I didn't know that. When I was in the Third Crusades, that was in the 1100s, that's what we called them. Kelvin Chin didn't know that. I didn't know it was an adjective, a verb, a noun. I didn't know what the word Saracens was till I looked it up. So that's an example of outside corroboration. The more recent one just happened literally 2-3 years ago. I met this guy on Facebook. We became friends, this guy named William Baldridge. And he found me on Facebook because he also used to teach meditation back in the 1970s. I didn't know him then. He was on the West Coast. I was on the East Coast. I didn't know anybody teaching TM meditation, transcendental meditation, through Maharishi's organization back in the 1970s on the West Coast. I didn't know people. I knew people in New England where I was. And he told me just a couple of years ago, he found me and he said, there's this guy in 1973. So remember, my first memories in 1977. He told me, and I put his letter. He wrote a letter that's in my book, and he said that there's this guy named Charlie Lutz who was a spiritually oriented TM leader in the TM organization. Who I was not. I didn't know him. I never heard him speak. I wasn't into spiritual stuff. I told you I was into the science stuff of meditation and getting rid of stress. And teaching in education and so forth, in schools and stuff. I wasn't on the spiritual end of stuff. And this guy, William Baldrige, tells me just a couple of years ago that in 1973, he and I guess a bunch of his friends, they would go down to Los Angeles back then, hear this guy Charlie Lutz speak about spiritual stuff and meditation. And somebody asked him in the audience, is there anybody alive now who was with Jesus? And Charlie Lutz said, yeah. And this person who was with Jesus is a TM teacher now in the TM organization. And by the way, this person, he was supposedly Simon Peter, and he was also the very great, I'm reading William Baldrige's letter right now. He said he had also other significant lifetimes, including as the very great political and military ruler, Frederick the Great. And so again, William Baldrige is saying in this letter, it was shocking for me as a Christian to hear that someone as presumably spiritually advanced as Peter has had that subsequent lifetimes, much less one as a military and political leader. And so Charlie Lutz had said this multiple times, evidently, because I've talked to other people who were back then on the West Coast and knew Charlie Lutz, again, who I didn't know, never heard him speak, still haven't heard him speak. I guess he died in 2001. But, yeah, and I didn't have my memories until 4 years after this guy's talking about this.
So you were validated even before your memories started coming up.
Exactly. And I didn't even know which Prussian king I was. I knew I was a Prussian king starting in around 1979. I kept having this thought. It was just a thought. It wasn't even like a corroborated anything. It was just like, you were a Prussian king. I was a Prussian king. I didn't even know what Prussia was. I knew it was a country. I knew it was somewhere in Europe. I didn't bother to look it up because I never thought I was going to be talking about this stuff. And then in 2014, recently, that's when I had the experience of knowing which Prussian king I was. And that just kind of triangulated out of the blue, too.
So it's not necessarily that you get powed in the face with it, or you have a dream when you're sleeping and you don't know if it's an awake dream or a sleep dream. It's actually just little, almost synchronicity things that come to be, like the Prussian King, like using Prussian Blue in your brochure, which is also in the book.
Right.
So, and I believe that what you were going to speak at a conference which happened to end up being in King of Prussia, Pennsylvania. So all those things, just the word Prussia just kept coming up and coming up. And I know that for myself, there are times that in my own life, I will be speaking to somebody or I'll describe something and I'll use a word and say, damn, where the hell did that come from? You know, right. It's like, it's not in my vernacular. It's not in my vocabulary. People look at me and go, well, but wait a minute, what does that mean? And I'll tell them exactly what it means. It's like I know that most of them are coming from Old English, and I wasn't around during the time of Old English. And people could say, well, you love reading, Old English, like Dickens and everything else. But these they don't have to be intrusive, and they don't have to be scary. Let me take a quick station ID. You're listening to Metro on KGNU Radio, 88.5 FM in Boulder and 1390 AM in Denver with Miriam Schiff. We're joined today by Kelvin Chin, author on his newest book, After the Afterlife, Memories of My Past Lives. For more information, you can contact Kelvin at Kelvin, Kelvin, Chin, CHIN.org, or turningwithin.org. Let's go back to evolving from past lives. We were talking about, yes, we all know that we evolve from the epigenetics, from the strands that are on our DNA. But then in reading the book, there comes a time when the traits of some of your past life experiences, your past life people, are also yours, not knowing how, when, or where. Talk to me about one of them.
Yeah, these traits that seem to continue. So one of the traits that I have that's very emotional for me and very deep in my wiring is I just call it the protection of women and children. I have this deep thing about protecting women and children. I see something on the news, if something bad happens to women and children, it really bothers me. It bothers me. I'm sure it bothers everybody, a lot of people, but it's visceral. I get really angry sometimes, and sometimes I start crying. I mean, it's kind of unusually, an unusual degree of upsetness, we'll call it, for me. And I realized in the resurfacing of some of my memories that this goes back several thousand years for me. And one of the things is that surfaced for me is, so what I've done is I've kind of triangulated things. I have certain memories, and then if I can go back and I can corroborate some of those memories through looking at historical events, like the Saracen thing, not knowing the word, what that was in 1100, I didn't know, for Muslims, or looking at historical personality traits like what we're talking about now of somebody who's known. So, as you know, I have this memory of being Marcus Aurelius, and one of the things about his personality was that he abhorred pedophilia. And pedophilia was legal in ancient Rome during certain aspects, certain periods of the Roman Empire, and during Hadrian's reign, and Hadrian was a known pedophile. But when Marcus's stepfather, Antoninus, became emperor, one of the very first things Antoninus did was to outlaw pedophilia. Marcus publicly, there's records of Marcus publicly stating and praising that specific change in that specific law. Women and children, through when I was Richard in the Third Crusades and Sitting Bull, there's an example of me as Sitting Bull, the native leader, returning captured women and children to the soldiers' fort. At the great outrage of the other tribal leaders who wanted to do what to these women and children that the U.S. cavalry had done to our women and children, basically raped and murdered them. And I said, no, we're not going to be animals like they are. We are a civilized people. They think we are animals. They treat us like we are. We're not going to treat them the way they treat us. And so that, to me, is a long-standing inner trait that I have. And there are a couple of quick other ones is things like French. I was a French major at Dartmouth College. Richard, Frederick, they spoke French as their first language. The King of England spoke better French than he did English, and the King of Prussia spoke better French than he did German. So, and they were actually made fun of for their French. And we're all Latin scholars, So these are traits that you can, For me, I look back at these historical figures. There's only been a few historical figures out of my many lifetimes. Mostly I'm an unknown person. But music and being a musician and so forth. We've all been musically inclined, including my lifetime this time. So those are some traits that I've noticed that have been passed down, and there are many more that I've resurfaced.
When you hear people saying that they're watching a documentary, they see a picture, and let's say it's a road, and they go, but wait a minute, I know where that road goes to. How to, it must have been that I read it somewhere. And the intangibility of where they got that information from, that road goes to so-and-so or there or here or it turns around. Talk to me about that. The fact that déjà vu, oh, wait a minute, this happened already. I'm like we talk about parallel lives, but I'm wondering if it's
right.
Parallel lives or if it's past lives. Talk to me about it.
I think it's past lives. I think it's our memories creeping in. It's almost like they seep through the barriers. They can kind of sneak through into our conscious present day awareness. And you go, well, wait a minute. Have I been here before? And you check in with your sisters, your brothers, your parents, your aunts, your uncles, and you go, you've never been here before this lifetime. And I have clients like that. They've never been to England, and yet they fly there for the first time, and they go, well, feels like home. This is so familiar. And those are what I call the recognition memories I briefly alluded to earlier that can happen with me at the Museum of Fine Arts with artifacts. It can happen with places, too, or music. I hear that from people. Or I have one of my students, for her, it's jewelry. And I said, I use this phrase, follow the breadcrumbs, I told her. And I said, Josephine, follow the breadcrumbs, and you may find something. And so I said, I don't know what it looks like, but look online and see if you can find what it looks like. And they're serpent rings for fingers, ring fingers. And I said, look it up. All the breadcrumbs. When did they make them? They were made in 1st and 2nd century Egypt, ancient Egypt, and they were very popular in ancient Rome.
And that was her connection to it.
Yeah, and she started surfacing memories as a result. That was her beginning. Yeah.
Your students, talk to me a little bit about what they've been sharing with you. And how do they come to learning about their past lives? Do they come to you and say, okay, I have a sense that this might be going on or that going on? Or is it part of the turning within and overcoming the fear of death?
I think turning within and overcoming one's fears about death and dying can help. They're not prerequisites. So you don't have to be a meditator. You don't have to get rid of all of your fears and so forth and so on. Because I think nobody's perfect. I think we all carry a little bit of something. We're all working on something. Nobody's perfect. But does turning within help? Yeah. Does getting rid of our fears help? Sure. And I think for me, it definitely helps probably speed up my process of recovery of my memories, all the meditation that I did. So, yeah, that's one tool, we could say, that can help facilitate or speed up this recovery process. But it's not absolutely necessary. But I do help people with that. I don't do past life regression therapy. I know there are people out there who are really good at doing that. That's not what I do. I help people reduce their fears. I help them open up their consciousness more to themselves. And whether that opens up their past lives or it just opens them up and makes them feel more spiritually connected within, it doesn't matter. To me, it doesn't matter. They may have different goals and objectives. They come to me. But to me, I'm more of a holistic kind of approach guy. How can I help you learn more about yourself? And sometimes that's through past lives, and sometimes it's not. It doesn't have to be through past life memories.
We're running out of time, so in 1 second, what final thoughts do you have for our listeners today?
I would say learn from our past. And I mean, it doesn't have to be past lives. Learn from our past in this one lifetime. If you only have memories of this lifetime, I think it's a good maxim. Learn from our past. Don't make the same mistakes again. If you do have past life memories, then you can look at those and so forth, and how do they inform you about who you are. If you don't, look at your emotional patterns that you see today in your lifetime right today, because they're probably connected to your past lives. And think about how that can inform you about knowing more about yourself.
Thank you so much for joining me today. As always, intriguing, informative, and a pleasure to speak with you. For more information, please contact kelvinchin.org or turningwithin.org. You've been listening to Metro on KGNU Radio, 88.5 FM in Boulder and 1390 AM in Denver. I want to thank all our listeners for joining us today and your support of KGNU. It is our 45th birthday, and you made it all possible. I am your host, Miriam Schiff, reminding you to once again be good to each other.